She was already running when the doors blew open. The man on the gurney wasn't breathing. His shirt had been cut away somewhere between the parking garage and the trauma bay, and what was left of him. The gray skin, the stillness, the particular flatness of a chest that had stopped trying, looked less like a person and more like the idea of one. 3 gunshot wounds, pulse absent. The attending called it at 11:47 p.m. and stepped back, and the team began the practiced, unhurried process of clearing the room, the way people do when the emergency has converted itself into paperwork. Grace Mitchell was 25 years old, 7 months into her trauma rotation at Mercy General, and she had already seen enough dead men to know what they looked like. This one wasn't dead yet. She felt it before she could explain it. A flicker at the side of her neck, some part of her nervous system that had been trained by exhaustion and repetition into a kind of second sight. She crossed to the gurney before she knew she was moving. She pressed 2 fingers beneath his jaw, angled slightly, where the attending's fingers had been 30 seconds earlier, and found nothing. Hers found something. Faint, irregular, present. If you were with me right now, you'd feel it too. That question that turns your stomach over. Do I say something, or do I stay quiet? Do I blow up a room full of people who outrank me, or do I let a man die on a gurney because it's easier? What would you do? If this story already has you leaning forward, stay there. Hit like so this channel knows you're here, and drop a comment with your city or your country. I want to know how far this reaches. Now let's go back to that trauma bay, because Grace Mitchell is about to make the worst, and the most important, decision of her life. She pressed the call button before the doubt could catch up to her. I need you back in here. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I have a pulse. Dr. Raymond Holt stopped in the doorway. He was a compact man with 22 years in emergency medicine and an expression he wore in high-stress situations that communicated, without words, that he did not enjoy being second-guessed by people who had been in the building for 7 months. He turned slowly. Nurse Mitchell. Faint, irregular, left carotid, angled high. I need someone to verify. The room did the thing rooms do when a junior staff member contradicts a senior attending's pronouncement. It went very still, and everyone found something else to look at. Grace kept her fingers where they were. She did not remove them. Her heart was doing something unpleasant behind her sternum. Holt crossed back to the gurney. He positioned his fingers. He was quiet for 4 seconds that felt much longer than that. Get me an ultrasound. The room moved again. What followed was 20 minutes of controlled, escalating chaos, the kind that trauma staff understand as a second language, the shorthand of a system that had been built for exactly this. Epinephrine. Chest compressions. A defibrillator applied twice. Grace worked the right side of the gurney and kept her mouth shut and did every task she was handed with the focus of someone who understood that focus was the only thing she had to offer. The monitor spiked at 11:59. Sustained rhythm. Weak, but present, and sustaining. Someone exhaled. Someone else said something under their breath that wasn't quite professional. Doctor. Holt stood at the foot of the gurney and looked at the monitor for a long moment, and then he looked at Grace, and his expression had converted itself into something she couldn't entirely read. Good catch, he said. It was 4 words, and he said them quietly, and then he turned back to his patient and was all business again. Grace let herself breathe. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what the convoy of black SUVs idling in the ambulance bay meant, or why 2 of the men who'd carried him in were now stationed at either end of the trauma hallway in suits that didn't quite conceal what was underneath them. She didn't know that the man on the gurney was Ethan Calloway, that the name meant something specific and weighted in this city, that knowing it would change the texture of the next 48 hours in ways she wasn't equipped to anticipate. She found out the name approximately 11 minutes later when a man built like a doorframe walked into the trauma bay without asking permission and said, in a voice that was accustomed to producing results, "How is he?" It wasn't a question. Grace turned from the monitor. The man was somewhere in his mid-30s, dark-haired, with the particular stillness of someone whose body had learned that stillness was a form of control. His suit jacket had been removed at some point. She saw it folded over his left forearm, and there was a smear of something on his right collar that she identified professionally and quickly as blood that wasn't his own. "Are you family?" she said. "I'm his." This was not technically an answer to the question she had asked, But something in the way he said it made her understand that it was the only answer she was going to get, and that in his particular world, it served the same function. She looked at the monitor. She looked back at him. "He's alive," she said. "His rhythm is unstable. He lost significant blood volume, and we're replacing it. He's going to require surgery for at least one of the wounds, possibly two. The attending is reviewing imaging now." She paused. "What's his name?" "Calloway." The man's eyes were on the bed. "Ethan Calloway." She wrote it on the chart. Her handwriting was neat, which was something she'd been complimented on and never thought about. And she wrote it with the same automatic tidiness. She wrote everything, but her hand paused for one fraction of a second between the first name and the last, because the last name had landed in some part of her brain that stored information about the city she lived in, and that part of her brain was currently trying to tell her something that the rest of her wasn't ready to receive. "His emergency contact?" she said. "Me." The man finally looked at her. His name, she would learn later, was Logan Hayes, and he was the kind of person who had learned to evaluate threats and assets in the same glance, and the glance he gave her was thorough, without being aggressive. "Who found the pulse?" She held the chart. "I'm sorry?" "They told me he was called, then someone called him back." "Who found the pulse?" "I did." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, a small nod, precise, that seemed to mean something specific, and turned back to the bed. "Don't let him be moved without my knowledge," he said. "That's not— I understand." I was already walking. "Don't let him be moved." The hospital had a policy about law enforcement notification in cases involving gunshot wounds, and Grace had filed the report by 12:15, which was within the required window and was also the last uncomplicated thing that happened for the next 9 hours. By 12:30, she was aware that the hallway outside Trauma Bay 4 had acquired additional occupants. By 1 a.m., there were 6 men in suits distributed across the 3rd floor in a pattern that was clearly deliberate. 2 at the elevator bank, 2 at the stairwell exits, 1 outside the bay itself, and 1 she kept catching at the edge of her peripheral vision, who seemed to be moving a slow, continuous circuit of the floor. By 1:15, a 7th man had arrived, older than the rest, in a dark overcoat that had the particular cut of something expensive, and he had gone directly to Logan Hayes and spoken to him for 4 minutes, in a voice low enough that she couldn't catch anything through the observation window. She told herself it wasn't her problem. She had 2 other patients, a 43-year-old with a tibia fracture from a car accident on Route 91, and a teenage kid with alcohol poisoning who had already apologized to her 3 times with the particular sincerity of someone who was approximately 2 hours from not remembering any of this. She checked on them. She updated their charts. She stood at the nurse's station and drank coffee that had been sitting long enough to lose any moral claim to being coffee, and tried to feel normal. She didn't feel normal. At 1:47, the monitor in Trauma Bay 4 began alarming. She was through the door before the second nurse had turned around. The readout was wrong. Specifically, it was showing the kind of arrhythmia that could convert to something lethal with enough time and insufficient intervention. She checked his IV lines, both of them, running her hands along the tubing with a focus that was almost tactile, checking for kinks, for air, for anything that shouldn't be there. She found it in the secondary line. Something was in the bag. It wasn't the bag that had been there 20 minutes ago when she'd last checked. Same manufacturer, same size, same labeling, but not the same bag. She knew the bags she'd hung. She knew their lot numbers. She had a habit of noting lot numbers that one of her instructors in nursing school had called obsessive and she had called practical, and the number on the bag currently attached to his secondary IV was not the number she had written in her own neat handwriting at the bottom of his intake form. She clamped the line in one motion, reached up and unhooked the bag, set it on the supply cart with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something that had changed character from neutral to consequential, and tried to think through the implications without the implications swallowing her. Someone had switched the bag. In the trauma bay. On this floor. With 6 suited men in the hallway and a patient who was supposed to be, officially, in critical but stable condition. Her hand was not steady when she reached for the call button. She noticed this. She pressed it anyway. Logan Hayes was through the door in 45 seconds, which meant he had been much closer to it than she'd expected. He took in the room in a single scan. The monitor, the clamped line, the bag on the cart, Grace standing beside it. and his expression did not change, but something changed behind it. "Talk," he said. "The secondary bag was switched. I don't know when. Within the last 20 to 40 minutes. I clamped the line before it could run further." She kept her voice clinical, the way she'd trained herself to go clinical when she needed her hands to stop shaking. "Whatever's in that bag, it wasn't ordered and it wasn't standard. I need to get it to the lab." "No." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Nothing leaves this room." He crossed to the cart and looked at the bag without touching it. "Not through official channels." "That's a patient safety issue. I can't—" "Miss Mitchell." He looked at her. The way he said her name had the quality of something being confirmed rather than introduced. "You found his pulse tonight when an attending physician missed it. You just caught what I believe is an attempt to finish the job through his IV line. You're currently the most competent person in this building relative to keeping him alive, and I need you to understand that what happens in this room in the next 6 hours matters to a very large number of people in ways that are beyond the scope of a standard nursing shift." He paused. "I'm asking you to work with me." The monitor continued its arrhythmic complaint. She looked at the bag. She looked at Ethan Calloway, who was unconscious and gray-skinned and whose heartbeat she had personally pulled back from the edge of nothing. She looked at Logan Hayes. "I need a different IV setup. New lines, new bags from a sealed case I opened myself. And I need that bag tested. I don't care how you do it, but I need to know what's in it. Done. And I need someone I can actually see outside this door, someone who knows what a doctor looks like versus what someone wearing a doctor's coat looks like." Hayes looked at her for a moment. "You know the difference?" "I know everyone on this floor." She said it without heat. "If someone walks past that window who I haven't seen before, I want to know about it before they get through the door." He pulled his phone from his jacket. He made a call. He said 4 words into it. "Bay 4, now, confirmed." Then he looked back at her. "What else do you need?" What she needed was a different life, she thought. What she needed was to have gone home at the end of her shift like a sensible person and let Dr. Holt's call stand and let whatever was happening in this city happen without her fingerprints on any part of it. She was 25. She had student loans and a cat named Biscuit, who needed expensive food, and a mother in Phoenix who called every Sunday and asked if she was eating enough. She was not equipped for this. She had not trained for this. But she had found the pulse. And she had found the bag. And the man on the gurney was still alive, and she was the one standing between him and whatever came next. "I need access to the pharmaceutical cabinet," she said, "and I need the charge nurse off this hallway for the next 2 hours." Hayes asked no questions. He simply nodded and moved, and the machinery he controlled, invisible to her until now, distributed across this floor in dark suits and clipped communication, began to reorganize itself around the decision she had just made. By 3 a.m., the floor had become something else. She couldn't have described exactly when the transition happened, only that at some point she had stopped being a nurse managing a critical patient and had started being something she didn't have a clean word for, a fixed point around which other things were moving. And the thing they were all oriented toward was the man in Bay 4, who was still alive, whose rhythm had stabilized somewhat with the new IV setup, and who had not opened his eyes. She sat in a chair she'd dragged from the nurse's station and written his updated vitals in the chart with her usual neat handwriting, and she was thinking about the switched bag, about timing, about who had access to this hallway and when the door opened. Not Logan Hayes. Not one of the suited men. A woman in scrubs, early 40s, with a hospital ID that caught the light wrong. Too new, too bright. The laminate not carrying the particular wear of something that got clipped to a chest every day for months. Grace clocked it in the peripheral way she clocked lot numbers, without deciding to. The woman crossed toward the medication cart. "I've got him," Grace said. She stood. "What do you need?" The woman stopped, looked at her. Something moved behind her eyes that wasn't calibrated correctly for the situation. Too fast, too assessing. "Just checking the chart," she said. "Dr. Holt wanted an update." "Dr. Holt left at 2. Grace did not move from her position between the woman and the cart. His handoff was to Dr. Paredes. "If you need an update, you can reach him through the paging system." A silence. The woman's hands were at her sides, and her right hand was doing something subtle, a small, involuntary adjustment of grip on nothing, that Grace recognized not from nursing school, but from the particular education of being a woman in a city, the kind of education that happens in parking garages and late buses and all the moments when your body decides to pay attention before your brain catches up. "I think you have the wrong room," Grace said. Her voice was even. She was proud of it. "The nursing station can help you find what you need." The door opened behind the woman. One of Hayes's men, the one she'd mentally designated as the circuit walker, the one who kept moving, stepped into the bay with the particular casualness of someone who wasn't casual at all. He looked at the woman in the two new scrubs. He looked at Grace. "Everything good?" he said. "This nurse was just leaving," Grace said. "Wrong room." The woman left. Grace sat back down. She put her hands in her lap and she looked at the chart in her hands and she waited for them to stop shaking, which took longer than she would have liked. The circuit walker remained inside the door. "That's twice," he said. "I know. Hayes is going to want to hear about that." "I know." She looked at the monitor, rhythm still holding. "Tell him in 5 minutes. I need 5 minutes." He gave her the 5 minutes. She used them to breathe and to rechart the vitals she'd already charted because her hands needed something to do, and to have the argument with herself that she'd been having since 12:15. The one that went, "You can still walk away from this. You can flag this to hospital security and step back and let whatever this is become someone else's problem." She had the argument. She made the case to herself. She considered all the angles. She came to the same conclusion she'd been coming to since she'd first pressed her fingers to his jaw and felt that faint, stubborn, inconvenient heartbeat. She wasn't going anywhere. Ethan Calloway opened his eyes at 4:19 a.m. Not fully. It was more of a surface break, consciousness rising to look around and deciding whether it wanted to stay. He was on heavy analgesics, which meant the opening was slow and confused, and his first attempt to speak produced nothing she could interpret. She moved to the side of the bed and adjusted the pillow behind his head, and spoke in the measured, unhurried way she used with patients who were coming up from sedation. "You're in the hospital," she said. You're okay. You're stable. My name is Grace." He focused on her face with the deliberateness of someone assembling their vision from pieces. His eyes were dark, darker than she'd expected from the photographs she'd seen later. The ones that circulated in certain news contexts, the kind of photographs that were always slightly blurred and taken from a distance. "How long?" he said. The words came out rough and abbreviated. "A little over 4 hours since you came in." He was quiet for a moment, processing this with the particular effort of someone who had important questions and a very limited budget of energy to ask them. "Logan? He's outside. I can get him." "Wait." His hand moved, a small, effortful motion, and she wasn't entirely sure what he intended, but she stilled. He looked at her. "You're the one who found the pulse." It wasn't a question. Hayes had clearly been in the room with him at some point. "Yes." "And the bag?" "Yes." He held her gaze. His was steadier than it had any right to be for a man who had been declared dead for approximately 90 seconds earlier that evening. Something was working behind his eyes. Evaluation, she thought, the kind of rapid assessment that people who have survived by reading other people develop as a reflex. "Why?" he said. She frowned slightly. "Why what?" "Why stay?" "After the bag. You could have walked." It was not the question she'd expected. She considered it for a moment with the seriousness it seemed to deserve. "Because you still had a pulse," she said, "and somebody in this building was trying to change that." He said nothing. His eyes didn't leave her face. "My job," she added, because she felt the answer needed something more grounded than whatever the first part had sounded like. "I take it seriously." The corner of his mouth did something, not quite a smile, closer to recognition. "Get Logan," he said. She got Logan. Hayes came through the door with the contained urgency of someone who had been waiting and was now operational again. He crossed to the bed, looked at Calloway's face, and something in his own composure shifted in a way she recognized as relief. Not performed, just real. The quiet relief of someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing and had just been told they could set it down for a moment. "Damien," Calloway said. Hayes's jaw tightened. One small movement. "It's confirmed. The hit tonight came from inside." "I know." Calloway closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "How many?" "The ballroom team is neutralized. I don't have numbers on the second wave yet." A pause. "There was a third contact attempt here about an hour ago." Calloway turned his eyes toward Grace, who was standing at the monitor, occupying herself professionally. She handled it, Hayes said. Calloway looked at her for another moment with that same quality of assessment, and then something settled in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of decision. The decision that you make about a person when you've seen enough of them to draw a preliminary conclusion. Miss Mitchell, he said. She looked at the monitor. Your rhythm's still irregular. You need to rest. Miss Mitchell. He waited until she turned. I don't trust easily. That's not really relevant to your care plan. I'm telling you because you should understand what it means when I say it. He held her gaze with the steadiness of someone who had decided to be very specific. I trust you. She looked at him. She looked at Logan Hayes, who was watching this exchange with an expression she couldn't quite decode. She looked back at the monitor. Rest, she said. We can talk about the implications of that in the morning. He almost smiled. Then his eyes closed, and his breathing evened out, and Grace Mitchell stood at the bedside of Ethan Calloway, crime lord, presumed dead, alive by the margin of one stubborn nurse who had been in exactly the right place at exactly the wrong time, and felt the particular weight of a life that had just changed its shape without asking her permission. Outside the window, Las Vegas was doing what it always did, burning. She pulled up a chair, opened his chart, and got to work. The morning shift change happened at 6:30, and Grace had been awake for 22 hours by the time it did. She stood at the nurse's station and gave her handoff report to Donna Reyes, who was 53 and had worked this floor for 11 years and had the specific energy of a person who had seen everything and was therefore unimpressed by most of it. Grace kept the report clinical. She said critical patient in Bay 4. Unstable rhythm, now stabilizing, monitoring closely. She did not say the patient is Ethan Calloway or someone swapped his IV bag with something that wasn't saline, or there are 6 men in suits on this floor and one of them has been walking a circuit outside that door since 1 a.m. She said vitals, medications, intake, output. She used the language of charts. Donna looked at her over the rim of her reading glasses. You look terrible. I'm fine. You look like you haven't sat down in 6 hours. I sat down twice. Grace capped her pen. Bay 4 needs someone attentive. The chart has specific notes about IV access. Follow them exactly. Don't substitute bags from the general supply. Open everything from a sealed case. Donna looked at the notes. She looked at Grace. You want to tell me why? Contamination concern. I noted it for pharmacy review. This was not exactly a lie. It was the architecture of a lie, the shape of honesty with different contents. And Grace had never been good at lying, which was why she'd learned to use language that was technically accurate and directionally misleading. Donna was looking at her with the particular skepticism of a woman who had spent 11 years on this floor and had developed an accurate read of when a colleague was managing information. The men in the hallway, Donna said. Patient security detail. We're a hospital, not a hotel. I know. Administration is aware. Grace wasn't certain this was true. She made a mental note to make it true before it became a problem. Just follow the notes on Bay 4, please. Donna held her gaze for a moment, then went back to the handoff sheet. Go home, Mitchell. You look like you need 12 hours and a sandwich. Grace went instead to the family consultation room at the end of the hallway, which was unoccupied at 6:40 in the morning, and closed the door and sat in one of the padded chairs that hospitals kept in these rooms specifically because people needed to receive difficult information while seated, and pressed her palms flat on her thighs and tried to think clearly. She had been up for 22 hours. She had found a pulse that an attending physician had missed, intercepted a contaminated IV bag, identified and deflected what she was nearly certain had been a second attempt on a patient's life, and been told by that patient, Ethan Calloway, who was a name that meant something specific and weighted and almost entirely bad in the context of this city, that he trusted her. She had $312 in her checking account, a cat at home who needed feeding, and a mother who would call in approximately 48 hours and ask if she was eating enough. She was not eating enough. Logan Hayes knocked on the consultation room door and opened it without waiting for her answer, which told her something about how he operated and confirmed things she'd already intuited. He sat across from her. He had the look of a man who also hadn't slept, but wore it differently. Not the fraying, unraveling quality of exhaustion, more like something compressed. A spring under tension that had decided to stay that way indefinitely. We're moving him, Hayes said. Grace looked up. Moving him where? Out of this hospital. He's not stable enough to... A second team is coming. We have approximately 4 hours before they try again. He said this with the flatness of someone relaying weather information. The hospital is compromised. The IV bag confirms someone has access to this floor, which means access to the supply chain, which means it's not one person we're looking for. It's a network. She absorbed this. Where are you taking him? That's not information I can give you. I'm his nurse. You were his nurse. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, the posture of a man who had thought about what he was going to say and had decided to say it directly. I'm asking you to come with him. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms get quiet when the thing that's been building since the beginning of a conversation has finally arrived. That's not a reasonable ask, she said. I know. I have a job. I have a life. I have a lease. I know that too. He didn't flinch. I also know that you are the only person in this building who has kept him alive twice tonight, and that whoever is running this operation now knows your face, and that the woman in the scrubs who walked into Bay 4 did not come back to try again. Not because she gave up, but because she was told to wait. Grace felt something cold move through her chest. That's speculation, she said. The ID badge she was wearing belongs to a nurse named Patricia Sowell, who is currently on medical leave in Reno, Nevada. Hayes held her gaze. She filed her leave paperwork 3 weeks ago. That badge was cloned. Someone planned for tonight well in advance, which means they also planned for contingencies, and you are now a contingency. She said nothing. Her hands were flat on her thighs. If you go home, Hayes said, you go home to a situation I can't control. If you come with us, you have protection, and Ethan has the one person who's demonstrated an ability to keep him breathing when everyone else has failed at it. A pause. I'm not ordering you. I'm explaining the options. You're explaining 2 options, and one of them gets me killed. Yes. She looked at the window. Outside, Las Vegas was doing its morning thing. The particular exhausted brightness of a city that had been going all night and hadn't fully committed to stopping. She thought about her cat. She thought about her checking account. She thought about the woman in the 2 new scrubs and the way her right hand had adjusted its grip on nothing. I need to make a phone call, Grace said. 1 call. Keep it short. She called her neighbor Petra, who was retired and had a key and had fed Biscuit before during Grace's longer shifts, and she said she had a work emergency and could Petra check in on the cat. And Petra said, of course, honey, is everything okay? And Grace said yes, just a long week, and ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she stood up. What do I need to bring? The transfer happened at 8:14 a.m., and it looked from the outside like nothing. That was the point. 2 hospital transport vehicles left the ambulance bay within 6 minutes of each other going in different directions, one carrying a patient being transferred to a rehabilitation facility across the city, one carrying Ethan Calloway, who was in a portable monitoring setup that Grace had assembled herself, packed with the specific supplies she'd identified as necessary for a patient whose rhythm was still doing things she didn't entirely like. She rode with him. Hayes rode in front. There were 2 other vehicles she couldn't see but knew were there from the way Hayes communicated. Clipped exchanges on an earpiece, a hand gesture to the driver that produced a specific response in their routing. Calloway was semi-conscious through most of the transfer. He surfaced twice, briefly, and both times his eyes went directly to her face with the unsettling focus of a man who had decided what was worth orienting toward and had made his choice. The facility they arrived at was not, on the outside, anything identifiable as medical. It occupied the ground floor and basement of a building that presented as a logistics company, loading dock, unmarked vehicles, a sign above the entrance that named a company Grace had never heard of. Inside it was something else, a compact, serious underground medical space that had been built by people who understood what medical spaces needed and had the resources to build them without oversight. She stood in the middle of it and turned a slow circle and took inventory. 2 surgical bays. Proper lighting. An anesthesia setup that was older than she'd prefer but functional. A pharmaceutical cabinet that was significantly better stocked than she'd expected. Monitoring equipment that was good, not hospital grade but close and clean. A crash cart in the corner whose pads were in date. Who set this up? She said. People who needed it, Hayes said from the doorway. When was it last used? 8 months ago. For what? A pause. Similar situation. She looked at him. He met her gaze without elaborating, and she filed this away, not as a reassurance, but as information about the world she was standing in. A world that had learned to need things like this and had built them, quietly, in the basements of buildings that looked like something else. She went to work. The first argument happened at 11 a.m., and it was between Grace and a man she hadn't been introduced to, which set the tone for everything that followed. He came into the lower bay while she was adjusting Calloway's monitoring leads, and he had the look of someone accustomed to being in charge of medical decisions in this space. Late 50s, gray at the temples, white coat that was a gesture toward medical authority rather than an actual credential she'd seen verified. He introduced himself as Dr. Emil Wren, and he said it the way people say things when they expect the title to do most of the work. "I'll take it from here," he said. Grace did not step back from the bed. "Take what from where?" "His care." Wren moved toward the pharmaceutical cabinet. "I have his prior records. I know his history." "What's his current rhythm?" Wren glanced at the monitor. "Sinus with PVCs." "It was sinus with PVCs at 9:40. It's now showing intermittent bigeminy." She watched him look at the monitor again, recalibrating. "The pattern started about 40 minutes ago. It's not dangerous yet, but it will be if we don't adjust the antiarrhythmic, and I need to look at his potassium before I do that because his last level was borderline." Wren was quiet for a moment. "I have a lab set up in the back," he said. "I know. I found it at 9:15. I've already drawn the sample. I need the result before I touch the medication." She turned back to the leads. "You can supervise if it makes you more comfortable." The silence behind her had a specific quality. "Hayes said you were a trauma nurse," Wren said. "I am. Not a cardiac nurse." Rhythm interpretation is in the trauma curriculum. She checked the lead placement on his left chest. "Calloway's rhythm presentation tonight wasn't straightforward. I've been watching it for 7 hours. You've been watching it for 40 seconds. She looked up. "I'm not trying to step on your authority, Dr. Wren. I'm trying to not let him go back into the arrhythmia that nearly killed him 3 hours ago. We can establish a hierarchy after we have the potassium result." Another silence. Then Wren crossed to the lab setup in the back, and Grace heard the sound of equipment being activated, and she allowed herself one full breath before turning back to the monitor. Calloway's eyes were open. He'd been watching the exchange. She could tell from the quality of his alertness, not the surfacing confusion of someone waking up, but the focused attention of someone who had been present for a while and had chosen not to announce it. "You're awake," she said. "I've been awake." "How much did you hear?" "Enough." His voice was rough, the dryness of someone who hadn't had water in too long. She reached for the cup on the supply cart and held the straw to his mouth, and he drank without comment, which she noted as a man who had learned to accept help without making it mean something. "Wren's been with me for 4 years. He's loyal." "I don't doubt his loyalty. I doubt his attention to detail." Something moved at the corner of Calloway's mouth. "He's going to dislike you." "That's fine. I don't need him to like me." "What do you need?" She considered the question with more seriousness than he'd probably intended. "Your honest answers when I ask you medical questions. No minimizing, no tough man nonsense about pain levels." She adjusted the monitoring lead that had been giving a slightly dirty signal. "And I need you to tell me if something feels wrong before it becomes something I'm reacting to instead of preventing." He held her gaze. In the light of this basement, she could see things about his face that hadn't been visible in the trauma bay. The fine scar along his left jaw, old enough to be silver white, from something she didn't ask about. The particular way exhaustion sat differently on a face that had made a habit of not showing it. He was probably 40, she thought, or close to it, though he wore it like a man who had packed more living into those years than most people managed in 60. "Damian Cross has been my CFO for 7 years, he said. It came out without preamble, the way things come out when someone has been sitting with them for long enough that they've converted from thought to pressure. "He built the financial structure for everything I run. He knows every account, every shell, every contingency fund." A pause. "He also knows about this facility." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Does Hayes know that?" "I told him 10 minutes ago." "And?" "And he's outside making calls he won't tell me about because he thinks I'll interfere." The corner of his mouth did the thing again. Not quite a smile, something more tired than that. He's not wrong. She checked the monitor. The Bigemini was still there, nagging and irregular. Why are you telling me? He looked at her. Because you're going to hear things in the next 48 hours that will give you a picture of what I am and what I've done. I'd rather you hear some of it from me. I'm not your confessor. I know, I'm not confessing. He shifted slightly against the pillow, and she saw the effort it cost him and resisted the impulse to comment on it, because commenting on it would make him stop. I'm explaining the landscape so you can make decisions about it. What kind of decisions? Whether to stay. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the pharmaceutical cabinet where Ren was running her potassium test. She looked at the crash cart in the corner. I'll make that decision when I have more information, she said. Right now I need you to lie still and let the antiarrhythmic do what it's doing. He lay still. She was fairly certain this was the most cooperative he'd been with anyone in a very long time. The potassium came back low, which she'd expected, and she adjusted the supplementation protocol and updated the medication log with the notation style she'd been using since nursing school, the kind that left a clear, complete record that any other clinician could follow. She was 3 lines into it when Hayes came back downstairs. His face had the compressed look from earlier, but tighter now. Something had happened. Talk to me, Calloway said. Hayes looked at Grace. She stays, Calloway said. Hayes looked at him for one beat, the look of a man measuring a decision he'd already made. Then he crossed his arms and said, Damien's been in contact with the Varela network. The room got quiet. The monitor continued its business. When? Calloway said. The first contact we can confirm was 6 months ago. There's communication we've recovered from a device we didn't know he had. A secondary phone, different number, registered under a name I've never heard before. He's been talking to Marco Varela's people for 6 months, minimum. Grace filed the name away. She didn't know it, but the way Hayes said it, the particular weight he gave it, told her it belonged in the category of things that changed the shape of a situation. What did he offer them? Calloway's voice was even, terribly even. Territory, the Eastern Distribution Network. And Hayes paused, the pause of someone choosing how to land what comes next. The location of Olivia. Calloway didn't move. He gave them Olivia's location, Hayes said. We're not sure what the exchange was. We're trying to confirm whether she's been contacted or... Get her! Calloway's voice had changed register, not louder, quieter, which was worse. Right now, pull her out of wherever she is and get her somewhere I know about. I have 2 men on the way to her already. Not 2 men, you go. Ethan, I can't leave you. Logan. The name came out like a period at the end of a sentence that wasn't open to revision. She's 23 years old. She doesn't know any of this is happening. You go. Hayes held the eye contact for 3 seconds. Then he nodded, once, and turned, and his footsteps on the concrete stairs were quick and deliberate. Grace watched Calloway's monitor. The Bigemini had spiked with the stress of the last 2 minutes. She could see it in the readout, the rhythm stuttering in a way that wasn't dangerous yet, but was heading somewhere she needed to redirect. You need to calm down, she said. I know that's not a useful thing to say. I'm saying it anyway. I know. He pressed the back of his head against the pillow. His jaw was tight. Olivia doesn't know what I do. I've kept it from her for 3 years. How old were you when you started? He looked at her. It wasn't the kind of question he'd expected. 19. Okay, she wrote in the chart. That's not relevant to your heart rate right now, but I may ask you about it later. She adjusted the drip rate on the antiarrhythmic. Tell me something boring, something that has nothing to do with any of this. He blinked. What? It'll help regulate your breathing. Tell me something boring about your life. What do you eat for breakfast? A silence that was almost absurd given everything surrounding it. Eggs, he said. Usually? Scrambled or fried? Scrambled. With too much black pepper. He was breathing differently now. Now she could hear it, slower, less locked. Olivia makes them better than I do. She adds something, I don't know what. Cream cheese, Grace said. Works every time. He looked at her. My mom's trick, she said. Small amount, right at the end. The monitor settled slightly. Not resolved? The Bigemini was still there, would be for a while, but no longer climbing. She noted the time and the drip adjustment and kept writing. You're good at this, he said. It's my job. Not the medical part. The other part. He watched her write. Keeping people's heads on while everything else is on fire. She capped her pen. I grew up with a difficult father and a mother who kept the whole house running on logistics and distraction. Turns out that's transferable. He didn't ask what she meant by difficult. She appreciated that. Dr. Wren came back from the lab area with the potassium result confirmed on a printout, and she took it from him and nodded, and he looked at her chart notation and made a small sound that might have been disagreement or approval and was probably somewhere between them. They had not arrived at a working relationship yet. They were in the negotiation phase, which was fine. Grace had been in worse negotiations. The second argument happened at 2 p.m., and it was worse than the first. It started with a phone that nobody had known about, a phone that turned up in the lining of Calloway's jacket, the one that had been cut off him in the ambulance and bagged with his personal effects and transported with them to this facility, and that Wren had found when he'd gone through the bag looking for a medical alert device that Calloway had mentioned. Wren brought it to Grace. He brought it to her specifically, which told her that in the 2 hours since their exchange over the potassium level, he had reached some provisional conclusion about the chain of authority in this room. He had an active call on this when he came in, Wren said, low. Look at the log. She looked at the call log. The phone had been making outgoing calls for the 45 minutes prior to the ambush, all to the same number. The number's contact name was DC. She stood very still for a moment. Damian Cross. She walked into the main bay. Calloway was awake, which was fortunate or unfortunate depending on how this went. She held up the phone. This was in your jacket. He looked at it. Something moved across his face, fast, there and gone. I need you to tell me about the 45 minutes before the ambush, she said. That's not a medical question. No, it's a question I'm asking because I need to understand whether you knew this was coming. She kept her voice flat, not angry. She wasn't sure she was angry, exactly. She was something more concentrated than angry. Because if you walked into something you knew was prepared for you, there are implications for what happens next that I need to account for. Calloway looked at the phone. He looked at her. I didn't know, he said, but you called him. I called him because he was the one who told me to be at that event. He set the appearance, arranged the logistics, confirmed the security detail. His jaw worked. I called him because something felt wrong about it, and I was trying to figure out what. Did he answer? 3 times. He sounded normal. A pause. He's good at sounding normal. She set the phone on the supply cart. She picked up her pen. She stood there for a moment not writing anything, which was not a thing she usually did. What? Calloway said. I'm thinking about the fact that he answered 3 times in the 45 minutes before men with guns walked into that room. She looked up. He was tracking you. He wanted to know you were in position. Calloway said nothing. His face had the controlled neutral quality Hayes's face got when something was being processed that was too large or too personal for immediate expression. 7 years, he said, quietly. I know. He stopped. She waited. He was at my mother's funeral, Calloway said. He was the one who organized the security for it. He knew where everyone was going to be. Something settled in his face. Not grief exactly, more like the specific heaviness of a person who has just finished calculating the full scope of something they already knew was bad and has arrived at a number larger than expected. He's been positioning for this for a long time. Hayes said 6 months from the communications they found, but if he was already thinking about it at your mother's funeral, that was 4 years ago. Grace looked at him. 4 years, she said. Yes. She wrote the time in the chart. She didn't write anything else for a moment. Outside, somewhere above them, muffled by 2 floors of concrete and logistics company infrastructure, the city was making its afternoon sounds. Why is this important to your medical care? Calloway said. Not unkindly. It's not. She capped the pen. She stopped herself, rearranged. I wanted to understand who's coming for you, so I have an accurate picture of what I'm operating inside. He studied her. And do you? She looked at the monitor. The hegemony had quieted somewhat. The potassium correction was working, slowly, the way corrections always worked when you gave the body something it had been missing and let it remember what to do with it. I have a better one than I did this morning, she said. He nodded. His eyes closed. Not sleep. She could see the tension still in his face, the working of something he wasn't done with, but a conservation of effort. The discipline of a man who had learned that not everything worth thinking about required his eyes to be open. She was charting the 2 o'clock vitals when his hand closed around her wrist. Not forceful, just present. A contact that had a specific meaning without a specific language. "Cross is going to come here," he said, without opening his eyes. Not directly. "He'll send people first to confirm the location, and when he's confirmed it, he'll want to do it himself." A pause. "He's that kind of man." "What kind?" "The kind who needs to watch." He opened his eyes. The look in them was something she hadn't seen from him before, not the assessment or the calculation or the careful management of what he revealed. Something more basic, something that had been compressed under everything else and was now, briefly, at the surface. "He's going to come here, and when he does, I won't be ready. You have Hayes. Hayes is with Olivia. I can't pull him back." His hand was still on her wrist. "I have Ren, who is 61 years old and loyal, and not a fighter. I have 2 men outside who are good but not enough." He looked at her. "And I have you." She looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the crash cart in the corner, and the pharmaceutical cabinet, and the surgical bay with its older-than-she'd-prefer anesthesia equipment. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I know what you are." He released her wrist. "I'm telling you what's coming." She stood there. Ren appeared in the doorway from the lab area, holding a tablet with updated blood work on the screen, and she crossed to him and took it and reviewed the numbers, and they were better. Not good, not yet, but trending correctly, the body asserting its preference for function over failure. She noted the improvements and updated the chart and handed the tablet back to Ren, who looked at her with the beginning of something that might eventually become respect, and said nothing. She went back to the bedside. Calloway was watching the ceiling. "The woman in the scrubs," Grace said, "the one from the hospital. What would have happened if she'd gotten to the cart?" "Second agent in the building," he said, without looking down. "Probably already positioned near an exit. Contamination runs, monitors alarm, confusion in the hallway, and in that window." He stopped. "Fast. Professional. Damien pays for the best." She stood at the bedside and thought about the gap between what she'd trained for and what she was currently inside of, and whether that gap was something that could be bridged by competence and proximity, and the stubborn refusal to walk away from a patient who still had a pulse. Then she thought about something else, something that had been sitting at the back of her mind since Hayes had mentioned the communications found on a secondary phone registered under a name nobody recognized. "The phone," she said, "the one from the jacket. The number listed as DC. Calloway looked at her. "Has anyone called it back?" A silence. "No," he said. If Damien Cross spent 6 months preparing this, he had contingencies. Multiple teams, multiple approaches. The IV bag was one. The woman in the scrubs was 2. She kept her voice clinical, the way she went clinical. If those failed, he has a 3. And the fact that you are not in Mercy General anymore may already have triggered it. She looked at the phone on the supply cart. If someone calls that number from your phone, from a location he doesn't recognize, he's going to assume you're operational enough to be a threat. Which is true. Calloway was very still. "That changes his timeline," she said. "He accelerates. He either accelerates or he pulls back and reconfigures. And if he reconfigures, it might buy Hayes time to get back here with Olivia before, or it tells him exactly where I am. If this facility's location is already compromised, I don't know if it is." He sat up slightly, which cost him, and she put a hand on his shoulder without thinking, and he stopped but didn't lie back down. "I don't know who else Damien has in his network. I don't know who he's spoken to in the last 18 hours. I don't know which of the assumptions I'm operating on are still valid." She looked at him. "That's the worst part," he said. "Not the wound, not the fact that he tried to kill me." He said this with the specificity of someone who was being honest in a way he wasn't usually required to be. "The worst part is that I cannot trust what I think I know. He's been in my house for 7 years. He knows what I know. Every contingency I have, he helped build." "Not everyone." He looked at her. "He didn't know about me," she said. The monitor ran its small, steady commentary. The bigamy pattern had quieted to occasional, manageable, the rhythm settling into something that was still imperfect but no longer alarming. Calloway looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him doing the thing he did. the rapid, practiced assessment, the reading of a person against everything he already knew about people. And then he looked away, at the phone on the supply cart. "Don't call it," he said. "Not yet." He lay back against the pillow. "Wait until Hayes checks in, then we decide together." She pulled the chart and made the 3 o'clock notation. She wrote the time and the vitals and the medication adjustments and the clinical observations. And at the bottom, in her neat handwriting, she wrote patient alert and oriented, condition improving, and did not write any of the rest of it. Outside, somewhere above and past the concrete and the city's afternoon noise, a black SUV that she would not see until it was too late had been sitting on the street for 40 minutes. The man inside it was not Damian Cross. He was someone Cross had sent to confirm a location, and he had just confirmed it. The man in the SUV had been there for 40 minutes before anyone noticed him. It was Wren who noticed, which surprised Grace and probably shouldn't have. 61 years old, 4 years serving a man whose survival depended on the quality of the people around him, and Wren had developed certain habits. One of them was checking the street-level camera feed on the tablet mounted near the lab area every 20 minutes, a habit so ingrained it had become unconscious, the way experienced nurses check monitor readouts without deciding to. He came into the main bay with the tablet and set it on the supply cart without a word, and Grace looked at the frozen frame he'd pulled. A black SUV, street parking, same position in 3 consecutive frames taken 20 minutes apart. She looked at Calloway. He was already looking at the tablet. "How many exits does this building have?" she said. 4. 2 ground level, 1 through the loading dock, 1 through the utility corridor that connects to the building east of us. He was sitting up more than she'd cleared him for, and she noted this and said nothing, because the situation had moved past the point where the right angle of a hospital bed was the relevant concern. "The corridor exit comes out on a different street. It's the one we'd use." "How long to get you mobile enough to use it?" Wren said, "He shouldn't be moved." "I know he shouldn't be moved," Grace said. "How long?" Wren looked at the tablet. He looked at Calloway. He did the calculation that doctors do when the textbook answer and the real answer have stopped being the same thing. 20 minutes to stabilize transport, maybe 15 if we compromise on— "Compromise," Calloway said. Wren went to the pharmaceutical cabinet. Grace reached for her phone and called Hayes. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Not the automated kind, just silence and a beep. And she said, "We have a vehicle on the street that's been stationary for 40+ minutes. Building may be compromised. We're preparing to move through the utility corridor. Call me back." She ended the call and looked at the time. 3:47 p.m. Hayes had left at approximately 11 a.m. to collect Olivia from wherever she'd been. That was nearly 5 hours ago. For a city the size of Las Vegas, 5 hours was either nothing or everything, and she didn't have enough information to know which. One of the 2 men from outside came down the stairs. His name was Reese. She'd learned it in the morning, when he'd brought her a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for, and she'd decided this made him worth knowing. He was mid-30s, former military in the specific way that never fully becomes former, and his face right now had the quality of someone delivering information he'd already processed and was now transmitting without the processing showing. "Second vehicle," he said. "Different street, north side. Been there 12 minutes. Didn't catch it on the ground cam. I walked the perimeter." Calloway looked at Reese. "Tell Santos to prep the corridor. Santos is on the door. Pull him off. Door's already compromised if they've confirmed location." He looked at Grace. "How long for you to pack what you need?" 3 minutes. "You have 2. She moved. She had done trauma packing before. The specific skill of identifying what was essential and what was preference and being brutal about the distinction. She went through the pharmaceutical cabinet with the focus of someone who had made these calls before and pulled analgesics, antiarrhythmics, the supplies for wound management, IV access materials, the portable monitoring leads. She did not take what she couldn't carry. She packed into a bag she'd found in the supply closet that morning and set aside with the particular foresight that had apparently become a habit since last night. She was back at the bedside in 1 minute 50 seconds. Wren had already adjusted Calloway's IV to a portable saline lock, capped the line, covered the wound sites with the specific efficiency of a man who had done field medicine at some point in his past. Between the 2 of them, they had Calloway sitting at the edge of the bed, which was the moment that told the truth about how much the last 18 hours had cost him. The gray undertone in his face, The careful way he placed his feet on the concrete floor, the breath he took before he stood. That was the breath of a man calculating what his body could do and committing to asking more of it than was safe. He stood. He was upright. His jaw was tight, and his breathing was controlled in the way that people control breathing when they're managing pain they've decided not to discuss. Grace put her hand under his left arm, not holding, supporting. There was a difference. "Stairs," she said. "I know. They're going to be the hard part. I know that too. Tell me if you need to stop." "I won't need to stop." "Tell me anyway." He looked at her. Something moved in his face that wasn't gratitude exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a person who has decided that being looked after by this particular person is a condition they can accept. They moved. The utility corridor was exactly what its name described. Raw concrete, pipe runs overhead, lighting that was functional without being generous. The particular smell of a building's infrastructure that people who work in finished rooms never encounter. It ran approximately 60 meters from the basement access door to a metal fire door at the far end that opened, according to the building plan Reese had pulled on his phone, into the building east of them, and from there to a service exit on the next street. Calloway walked, slowly, carefully, with Grace's hand at his arm and Wren on his other side, and Reese ahead of them and Santos behind, and the corridor made the sounds corridors make, their footsteps, the ambient pressure of pipes, a distant mechanical hum that was either a generator or an HVAC system, or both. He made it 30 meters before he stopped. Not from pain. She checked his face and the pain was there, managed, controlled. He stopped because his phone had vibrated in the pocket of the clean shirt Wren had found for him, and the vibration had a specific pattern that made him reach for it with the automatic urgency of a conditioned response. He looked at the screen. He went very still. She watched his face do something she hadn't seen it do before. Not the controlled neutral, not the tired heavy, not the almost something at the corner of his mouth. Something she didn't have a clean word for, that lived between fury and a particular kind of devastation that comes when the thing you feared most turns out to be more complete than you feared. "What?" she said. He turned the phone and showed her the screen. It was a photograph. Taken recently. The timestamp read 40 minutes ago. It showed a room she didn't recognize, a couch, a lamp, the particular dishevelment of a space that had been entered by people who weren't invited. And in the center of the frame, sitting on the couch with her wrists zip-tied and her face pointed at whoever was holding the camera, was a young woman who shared Calloway's jaw and his eyes and approximately none of his ability to conceal what she was feeling. The text below the photograph read, "She's comfortable. That changes at midnight. Come alone." Grace looked at the timestamp again. 40 minutes ago. "Olivia," she said. "Yes." Hayes was going to her. "I know." His voice was very quiet. That was Hayes's number the message came from. She looked at him. He was looking at the phone. "He sent this," she said, carefully, making sure she understood. "Yes." "Logan Hayes sent this." "Yes." The word came out the same way the second time, flat, contained, the compression of something that was being held at enormous cost. "The man who has been with me for 9 years, who was with me when my mother died, who told me this morning that he was going to keep Olivia safe." He put the phone back in his pocket. His hand, when it came out, was completely steady, which was worse somehow than if it had shaken. "Sent me a photograph of my sister with her wrist bound. From his number, at 3:47 in the afternoon. Wren made a sound, not a word. Reese, ahead of them, had turned when they stopped, and he had heard enough of this to have an expression that was doing something complicated and professional at the same time. "We keep moving," Calloway said. "Ethan, we keep moving." He was already walking. The steadiness of it, the deliberate placement of each step, had converted from the caution of an injured man into something else. The forward motion of a man who has just received news that has simplified everything. When we're out of this corridor and in a location that isn't about to be breached, we figure out what happened to Logan Hayes and what Damian Cross promised him. Grace moved with him. Her hand was back at his arm, the same supporting contact, but something in the texture of the situation had changed, and she felt it in the corridor's concrete and the pipe hum overhead and the particular quality of the silence Reese was maintaining ahead of them. They reached the fire door. Santos pushed it open. Beyond it was exactly what the building plan had shown. Another basement space, this one belonging to what appeared to be a commercial laundry operation. Industrial machines standing dark and idle, the smell of detergent and hot metal embedded in the air. They crossed it, found the service exit, came out on a street that was not the street the SUVs were watching, and stood in the low afternoon light of a city that was doing its indifferent business around them. The car that Reese had arranged. She didn't ask how or when, because the how and when were part of a system she was still learning the grammar of, was a plain gray sedan parked 2 blocks east, and they reached it without incident, which did not feel like safety so much as a delay between one dangerous thing and the next. She got Calloway into the back seat and checked his wound sites and took his pulse. Still elevated, not alarmingly so, the sustained physical effort of the corridor walk registering in his body, the way any sustained physical effort registers in a body that has been shot 3 times in the last 18 hours. She updated the mental chart she'd been keeping since the transfer and noted what she would do about it when she had access to the supplies in the bag at her feet. Ren sat in the front. Reese drove. Santos followed in a second car. Calloway sat with his head back against the seat and his eyes on the ceiling of the car and said nothing for 4 minutes. Then he said, "Tell me how." Grace looked at him. "Tell me how this happened." Not to her specifically, more like he was thinking out loud in a way that required the presence of another person. "Hayes has been with me longer than Damien. He built the security infrastructure for everything I run. He vetted every location, every safe house, every fallback. He stopped, recalibrated. He was the one who told me about this facility. I didn't find it. He brought me here." She sat with this. "He brought you somewhere that he already knew the location of," she said. "Yes." "And then he left." "To get Olivia." His jaw worked, which he apparently didn't do. "Or he did," she said. "And something changed while he was with her." Calloway looked at her. "I'm not defending him," she said. "I'm asking whether Hayes was turned before tonight or during it, because those are 2 different situations." He was quiet for a moment. "Why does it matter?" "Because if he was turned before, Damien Cross has had access to everything Hayes knew for an unknown period of time, and we have to assume total compromise of every contingency." She kept her voice clinical. It was the only register she had available right now that was useful. If he was turned during... If something happened tonight that Cross used as leverage, there may be parameters. Something Damien offered or threatened that has limits. Calloway thought about this with this focused heaviness of a man running an analysis he didn't want to run. "Leverage," he said. "Did Hayes have anyone, family, someone specific?" A silence. The car moved through afternoon traffic, ordinary Las Vegas afternoon traffic, people going to ordinary places for ordinary reasons, and the distance between that world and the interior of this sedan felt, to Grace, like the distance between 2 different planets. "A daughter," Calloway said. "Mara. She's 11. Her mother died 3 years ago. Car accident. Logan raised her alone." A pause that had weight. He kept her very separate, deliberately. "Did Damien know about her?" Another silence. Longer. "Damien attended the mother's funeral," Calloway said. "He organized security for it." The echo of what he'd said in the facility, "He was at my mother's funeral, he knew where everyone was going to be," landed differently now, carrying a different freight. "He's been building a file on everyone around me. For 4 years, at minimum." She looked out the window. A gas station, a nail salon, 2 kids on bikes waiting at a crosswalk. "He threatened Mara," she said. It wasn't a question. "That would do it." Calloway's voice was flat, exhausted, containing something that she recognized. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but the specific understanding of a person who has looked at what someone did and identified the mechanism and found the mechanism human. Logan would do almost anything for that girl. "Almost." "Almost," he agreed. "He sent me the photograph. He told me she was there." He closed his eyes briefly. "He also told me to come alone, without specifying how or where, which means he's leaving me room." She thought about this. "Or it means he knows you won't come alone." Both things can be true. They could. She sat with both of them. Reese turned off the main road into a residential area. Lower density, older houses. The kind of neighborhood where a gray sedan didn't announce itself. He pulled into a driveway that belonged to a house that had the specific quality of a place that was maintained without being loved. Clean, functional, empty of the small human touches that accumulate when people actually live somewhere. "Whose place?" she said. "Nobody's," Reese said. "It's been dark for 8 months." She almost said that's what they said about the last facility, but she didn't. Inside, she got Calloway settled on the couch. Not ideal, not what she'd choose, but horizontal and stable with a pillow under his head and his vitals running through the portable leads she'd attached in the car, the monitor propped on the coffee table where she could see it from anywhere in the room. His rhythm had degraded slightly in transit, the hegemony back to an occasional partner, and she adjusted the medication rate and watched the monitor and thought about what she was sitting inside of. Ren came to stand beside her. "His pressure's low," he said quietly. "I know. He needs fluid. I have saline in the bag." She was already reaching for it. "He needs a hospital." "He can't go to a hospital." "Grace." Ren said her first name for the first time, and the way he said it had the weight of a man who has spent 4 years keeping another man alive and understood the limits of what he'd been able to do. The wound on his left side, the one that was evaluated for surgery in the trauma assessment, the imaging they ran. She looked at him. "I pulled the imaging file from the transfer documents." He produced a tablet. "I've been looking at it since this morning, and I didn't say anything because the situation was—" He stopped, showed her the screen. She looked at the image. She understood what she was seeing. She took the tablet from him and looked at it more carefully, the way you look at something when you want the looking to change what you find. It didn't change. "The fragment," she said. "It shifted in transport, or it was always closer to the— How long has he known?" Ren looked at Calloway, who was lying on the couch with his eyes closed. "I don't know if he knows." He knew the imaging was flagged for surgical evaluation. He knew. "I didn't ask me what that meant, and I—" Ren pressed his lips together. "I was waiting for a moment that wasn't happening every 30 seconds. She handed the tablet back. She stood there for a moment with her hands at her sides, doing the calculation. A metal fragment shifted. Its new position was intimate with a structure that didn't tolerate intimacy with metal fragments. The timeline it implied was not a timeline that accommodated much deliberation. She crossed to the couch. Calloway opened his eyes. He read her face in approximately 1 second, and his expression shifted from managed to alert. "Tell me," he said. "The fragment from the left side wound has moved. The position it's in now is close to the left renal artery." She said it plainly, without softening it, because he was the kind of man who needed plainness, and she had learned this about him in the last 12 hours. If it moves again, or if the tissue response around it accelerates, the risk of rupture becomes significant. He looked at the ceiling. A beat. "How significant?" he said. "Significant enough that ideally you'd be in a surgical suite right now." She sat on the edge of the coffee table across from him. "I can manage the pressure on the fragment conservatively. There are things I can do to limit movement risk and monitor the tissue response with what I have. But I need you to understand that I am a trauma nurse, not a surgeon, and what I'm describing is me doing everything possible to delay a procedure that I am not qualified to perform. But Ren is." She looked at Ren. Ren had the expression of a man who is being asked whether he can do a thing he hasn't done in a specific context, in a specific amount of time, and who is being honest about the answer. "I'm a physician. I've performed procedures in controlled settings. The surgical bay at the facility had—" "The facility we just left," Grace said. The room was quiet. "There's equipment here," Reese said from the doorway. He said it with the practicality of a man who had spent years solving exactly these problems. "Not surgical, but the network has resources. If we need to bring equipment here—" "How long?" Grace said. 2 hours. Maybe 90 minutes. She looked at the monitor. She looked at Calloway. She did the calculation out loud because he deserved to be in it. "His pressure is low, but holding. The fragment is stable right now. If we can keep him still, keep the pressure supported, and get what Ren needs in 90 minutes to 2 hours. She stopped. Finished. "It's possible." "Possible," Calloway said. "It's what I have." He held her gaze. Then he said, "Reese, make the call." Reese made the call. She sat with the monitor and watched numbers and thought about the word possible and what it contained and what it didn't, and after a few minutes, Calloway said her name. "Grace." She looked at him. "The midnight deadline," he said. "In the text." I know. It's 8 hours from now. I know that too. I can't move for 2 hours while we wait for equipment. Possibly longer if Ren needs setup time. He looked at the ceiling. That leaves me 6 hours, at best, to get to wherever Olivia is. Hayes will reach out again, she said. He left room. You said so yourself. And if he doesn't? She had no good answer for that, and she didn't invent one. Calloway turned his head and looked at the wall. She watched his profile, the jaw, the old scar, the specific shape of a face that was doing the thing faces do when they're working through something that has no clean resolution and the person knows it. I have to tell you something, he said. She waited. When I said I trusted you, this morning. Yes. I want you to know that's not something I've said to many people. He paused. 3. In my adult life. My mother. Logan. Another pause. And now you. The monitor continued its small, steady work. The Begemini registered once, twice, a reminder that the body had its own timeline and was not consulting anyone's. The third thing, she said. You said 3 people. He was quiet for a moment. Damien, he said, at the beginning. She understood. She didn't say anything else about it. They sat in the quiet house on the quiet residential street, the monitors running and the equipment 90 minutes away and 8 hours on a clock that nobody had started to count, but everybody was counting. And Grace looked at the imaging on Ren's tablet one more time and understood with complete clarity that she was about to do something she had never done, in conditions she had never trained for, on a man who had just told her she was the 3rd person in his adult life that he'd trusted. Then Reese's phone rang. He answered it. His face changed in the specific way faces change when information arrives that reconfigures everything that came before it. He looked at Calloway. It's not Hayes, he said. It's a number I don't recognize. They're asking for you. They say... He stopped. Something moved across his face. They say they have Hayes. The room's quality of silence changed. Cross, Calloway said. They didn't say a name. It's Cross. He held out his hand for the phone. Reese crossed the room and put the phone in his hand, and Calloway put it to his ear, and Grace watched his face. She watched it the way she watched monitors, for information, for change, for the specific fluctuations that told you what the numbers couldn't. The voice on the other end said something. She couldn't hear words. She heard the tone, calm, unhurried, the tone of a man holding all the cards in a game he designed. Calloway listened. He did not speak for a long time. His face did the controlled neutral thing, and then it did something else. A small crack, there and gone, barely a fracture. But she saw it because she had been watching his face for 12 hours, and she knew its geography. Where? He said. One word. The voice said something. How long do I have? The voice said something shorter. I want to hear her voice. A pause. Then, faintly, she heard it. A young woman's voice, tight with fear and the effort not to show it, saying her brother's name in a way that had years of history compressed into 2 syllables. Calloway closed his eyes. I'll be there, he said. He ended the call. He gave the phone back to Reese without opening his eyes. Then he opened them. He looked at Grace. The Meridian, he said. Damien's hotel, the penthouse. A pause. 1 hour. You can't... I know I can't. He sat up. The pain of it registered on his face, and he let it, openly, without the management, which told her he had moved past the point of spending energy on appearances. I know what the imaging shows, Grace. I know what you're going to tell me. I need you to tell me anyway, and then I need you to tell me what you can do in the next 60 minutes to get me to a hotel penthouse and back. She looked at him. Tell me what you need from me, he said. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the bag of supplies at her feet. She looked at Ren, who was looking at her with the expression of a man who had taken a private stance on this and was waiting to see if she'd take the same one. She looked at Calloway. I'm coming with you, she said. No. That wasn't a question. She was already opening the bag. If that fragment moves in the wrong direction, you have approximately 4 minutes before it becomes a situation that no one can fix. I am the 4 minutes. You don't go without me. She pulled out the wound dressing supplies. And before we leave, I'm going to repack that wound and give you something for the pain that will let you function without compromising your reaction time, and you are going to sit still and let me do it." He looked at her. The same look from this morning, the one that had the quality of someone confirming something they'd already decided was true about a person. "Okay," he said. She knelt in front of the couch and began to work, her hands doing what they'd been trained to do, moving with the competence of a person who had learned that the distance between what you can do and what the situation requires is a distance you close with everything you have, and then you close it a little further, and then you do not think about the gap that remains, but only about the next thing your hands need to do. The monitor ran its numbers. The afternoon light was going somewhere outside the window. The hour was already moving. And somewhere in the city, in a penthouse she'd never seen, Damien Cross was waiting for a dead man to walk through his door. The procedure took 51 minutes. She knew this because she tracked time the way she tracked everything. Not consciously, not as a decision, but as a baseline function that ran underneath everything else and surfaced when she needed it. 51 minutes from the first incision to the moment. Wren set down the last instrument and she pressed 2 fingers to Calloway's neck and found his pulse steady and present and doing what a pulse was supposed to do. She stood back. Her hands were bloody to the wrist. Her scrub top, Wren had found her one somewhere in the facility's supply closet, had a streak across the left side where she'd pressed her forearm against the table edge at one point without noticing. Her feet hurt in the specific way that feet hurt when you've been standing on concrete for too long, the ache that starts in the arch and works its way up to the place behind the knee. She stood back and looked at Ethan Calloway on the surgical table and let herself breathe. Wren was suturing. He worked with the focus of a man who had found, somewhere in the last 51 minutes, a version of himself he'd thought he'd left behind. The physician who operated on instinct and training and the specific trust between 2 people working in the same direction. He didn't speak while he sutured. She didn't either. The room had the quality it always had after something acute, a kind of spent stillness, the silence of machines that have been running at capacity and are now allowed to idle. Calloway was under sedation, light, controlled, nothing that would put additional strain on his cardiovascular system. Wren had managed the anesthesia component while she'd managed the procedure, and they had worked together with the improvisational fluency of people who had no choice but to function and had therefore decided to function well. The fragment was out. She'd set it on the instrument tray in a stainless steel basin, and she looked at it now. A piece of metal smaller than her thumbnail, irregular at the edges, that had spent 18 hours migrating toward a structure that would have killed him if it had reached it. It looked like nothing. It looked like debris. She looked at it for a moment with the specific feeling you get when you see the physical form of the thing that was trying to end someone, and found that the feeling didn't have a clean name. She covered it with a gauze square and turned back to Wren. "Pressure's stable," she said. "I know. I've been watching. His color is better." "I know that too." Wren tied off the last suture with the careful precision of a man who took finishing seriously. He looked up. "You did good work in there." She looked at the table. "We both did." "I've been keeping this man alive for 4 years," Wren said. He pulled off his gloves. He was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a person saying something they've been thinking for longer than the conversation. "I've done it with the best equipment I could access and the best resources his operation could provide." A pause. "Tonight we had a folding table and a bag you packed in 20 minutes. He looked at her. "And it worked." She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what to say. She picked up the monitoring leads and checked the readout and noted the time and wrote it in the mental chart she'd been keeping since 12:01 a.m. The previous night, which was now, she calculated, approximately 22 hours ago. She was tired in a way that had passed through the ordinary registers of tired and arrived somewhere else. A place where the body had converted exhaustion into a kind of flat, functional calm, the way extreme cold eventually stops feeling like cold and starts feeling like nothing at all. She pulled a stool to the side of the table and sat down and watched the monitor and let the stillness of the room settle around her. Calloway came up from the sedation at 2:47 a.m. Not all at once, in the gradual, surfacing way of someone ascending from a depth, consciousness arriving in layers. She watched the process with the attention of someone who had been watching his face for the better part of a day and knew its geography. The small movement behind closed eyes, the change in the set of his jaw as the sedation thinned, the breath that deepened from the shallow regularity of drug-managed sleep into something with more intention behind it. His eyes opened. He looked at the ceiling first, then at the monitor, then at her. "Okay," he said. His voice was rough from the airway management, the particular scrape of someone whose throat had been through something. "Tell me." "Fragments out," she said. "You're sutured. Pressure is good. Rhythm is the best it's been since you came in." She paused. "You need about 3 days of horizontal before I'll clear you for anything else." He looked at the ceiling again. She watched his chest rise and fall. "Damien's 12 hours," he said. "Started about 9 hours ago. 3 hours left." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Reese?" "He's upstairs. I can get him." "Not yet." He turned his head and looked at her directly, and the look had the quality of someone who has been under anesthesia and has returned to the world without any of the usual buffers between what they feel and what they show. "You performed surgery." "Ren performed surgery. I assisted." "That's not what Ren says." She looked at the monitor. "Ren is generous." "Ren is precise," Calloway said. "He told me before I went under that if something went wrong in there, the person he trusted to catch it was you." He paused. "He's been a physician for 35 years. That's not something he says to people." She didn't have an answer for this that didn't sound like deflection, so she didn't say anything. "Why are you still here?" he said. She looked at him. "You could have left," he said. "After the penthouse. After Cross let us walk out." He said it without accusation, clinically, the way she went clinical, as if he was working through a sequence of events and identifying the decision points. "You had Olivia. You had the cars. You had an exit. You stayed to do this." He looked at the ceiling. "Why?" She thought about it. She gave it the honesty it deserved. "Because the job wasn't finished," she said. "That's the first answer. It's the true one. It's one of the true ones." He looked at her. "Give me another." She looked at the stainless steel basin with the gauze-covered fragment and thought about the answer she didn't entirely know how to say, and tried to say it anyway. "Because somewhere in the last 24 hours you stopped being a patient and started being a person," she said. "And I don't walk away from people when the job isn't finished." She paused. "Even when the smart thing would be to—" He was quiet for a moment. "The smart thing," he said. "Getting involved in this, staying at the hospital, getting in the car, all of it." She kept her voice level. "None of it was the smart thing. And yet. She looked at her hands. The blood was gone. She'd scrubbed after the procedure, the automatic ritual of it, the thing you did. But she could still feel the memory of it, the specific weight of a situation that had required her hands to do something they'd been built toward without knowing it. "I'm 25 years old. I have student loans and a cat and a mother who calls on Sundays. I am not equipped for this world." "No," he said. "You're not." She looked at him. "You're equipped for something else," he said. "Something this world needed and didn't have." He paused. "That's not the same thing." She didn't argue with this. She wasn't sure she could. Reese came down at 4 a.m. with the information Calloway had been waiting for. She stayed in the room because Calloway hadn't asked her to leave, and she had learned that in this world the absence of an exclusion was a form of inclusion, and she sat on her stool with the monitor readout in her peripheral vision and listened. Cross had sent the transfer records. Not in 3 hours, not at the 12-hour deadline. He'd sent them at 3:40 a.m., 2 hours early, which Reese said meant something, and she could tell from the quality of Calloway's attention that he agreed. "He's moving," Calloway said. "That's what I think," Reese said. "What does moving mean?" she said. Reese looked at her. He'd stopped doing the thing of deciding whether to answer her in front of Calloway. Somewhere in the last several hours the question had resolved itself, and she wasn't sure exactly when. "It means he's transferring the assets he kept back. Not the ones in the records he sent. Those are the ones he's surrendering, the ones he hasn't declared." He looked at Calloway. "He's setting up to run." Calloway closed his eyes. Not from pain, from the specific internal work of someone making a decision about a man they spent 7 years trusting. "The Varela contact," he said, "in the records he sent. Marco Varela's accounts, 2 transfers in the last 4 months, totaling a lot." Reese's voice carried the specific diplomacy of a man who knew the number and was choosing his context. "Enough to have funded a competing operation, or to have bought a significant amount of goodwill in a network that borders yours. Cross wasn't just trying to replace me, Calloway said. He said it slowly, working through it. He was building an alliance. I was going to hand the Varela network access to the Eastern distribution in exchange for protection and legitimacy. He opened his eyes. He needed me gone so they could establish without internal resistance. And once they were established, he'd have leverage over both sides, Reese said. He'd have leverage over everything. Calloway looked at the ceiling. 7 years. He spent 7 years building a second position so that no matter what happened to the first one, he had somewhere to land. A pause. I should have seen it. Nobody saw it, Reese said. I should have. The room was quiet. She looked at Calloway's profile and thought about the specific weight of being the person who didn't see it, the particular kind of self-accounting that comes after a betrayal, when you retrace every step and find not that you made obvious mistakes, but that you made human ones, the kind where trust was the error, and trust was also the only thing that made the work possible. What do you want to do? Reese said. Calloway was quiet for a long moment. His breathing was even. The monitor showed his rhythm doing the thing it was supposed to do. Steady, imperfect in the small, ordinary ways that living hearts are imperfect, but sustaining. The Varela contact in the records, he said. His name. Felipe Garza. He's a Varela lieutenant, handles their western expansion. Call him. Reese blinked. Call him. Cross sent me the records because he's scared and because he thought it bought him time to run. He didn't think about what I could do with the Varela information in that window. Calloway turned his head and looked at Reese. Garza doesn't know that Cross has burned him. He doesn't know his name, and his transfers are now in my possession. Call him and explain that to him. Reese absorbed this. You want to use it as leverage. I want to close the alliance before Cross can make it permanent. If Garza understands that the arrangement he made with Cross is now a document in my hand, he has two options: fight me or negotiate. A pause. Make it clear that negotiation is available. Reese nodded once. He left. Grace looked at Calloway. That's not over, she said. No. Varela Network is a separate conversation that will take months. He looked at her. But Cross loses his escape route. Without Varela's protection, he's exposed. And then? He held her gaze. There was something in the look that wasn't the assessment or the calculated trust or the managed neutrality. Something that was the residue of anesthesia and blood loss in 51 minutes on a table. The specific rawness of a person whose defenses have been physically removed along with everything else. I'm going to be honest with you, he said. You usually are. About Cross. He paused. I'm not going to tell you what happens to him. Not because I'm protecting you from it. Because I think you already know. And I think what you know is accurate. And I think we both understand that there are parts of this world that you can be adjacent to without being inside of. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to be inside of it. She sat with this. I know what you are, he said. I knew it from the first hour. You're not this. You found a pulse at the right time and you made a series of decisions that any person with your training and your specific kind of stubbornness would have made. And now you're sitting in a basement at 4 a.m. with blood on your memory and a man you saved asking you a question you don't have to answer. She looked at him. What's the question? She said. What do you want? Well, Olivia came downstairs at 5:30. She had found somewhere to sleep. One of the upstairs rooms had a couch, apparently, and she had used it with the pragmatism of a 23-year-old who had been running on fear for 12 hours and had finally been permitted to stop. She came down in the same clothes, her dark hair loose, the marks on her wrists faded to the yellow-green of early bruising, and she stood in the doorway of the surgical bay for a moment and looked at her brother. He was asleep. Real sleep, not sedation. She could tell the difference now, had been able to tell it for years without having the words for it, the particular quality of a body that has decided it is safe enough to let go. She looked at Grace, who was at the monitor, which was where she had been for the last 3 hours, and who had no intention of being anywhere else until she was certain the numbers would keep doing what they were doing without her. Olivia sat in the chair Reese had brought down at some point and sat beside the stool. They sat together for a while without saying anything. He told me, Olivia said finally, about the hospital, about what you did. Grace didn't say anything. The pulse, Olivia said. The IV bag. She looked at her brother's face. He said you stayed when you didn't have to. I had to, Grace said. I just didn't know it yet. Olivia looked at her. She had the quality of a young woman who had grown up in the specific proximity of danger without being of it, who had learned to read people quickly because the alternative was not reading them at all, and in her world, the alternative was expensive. She looked at Grace with this skill and came to some conclusion that she didn't articulate. He doesn't do that, she said. The trust thing. He told me. He told our mother he loved her. He told Logan. She paused. He told Damien a long time ago. She said the name flatly, with the flatness of something that had been processed into a simpler form through repetition. He doesn't say it to many people. I know. Are you going to stay? Olivia asked. The question arrived the way Calloway's questions arrived, without decoration, looking for the actual answer. Grace looked at the monitor. She looked at the sutured line of the closure on his left side, visible at the edge of the dressing. She looked at her own hands in her lap. I don't know what staying means yet, she said. I know I'm not leaving tonight. Olivia nodded. It seemed to be enough. At 7:15 in the morning, Logan Hayes came to the house. She didn't see him arrive. She heard the sound of a car, heard Reese's voice at the top of the stairs, heard the specific quality of a conversation that was being managed carefully, the way you manage something that could go in multiple directions. Then footsteps on the stairs, and Reese appeared in the doorway, and behind him, Hayes. He looked worse than he had in the penthouse. The compressed quality was still there, but it had deepened overnight into something that lived closer to the surface. He had the eyes of a man who had not slept, and had not expected to sleep, and had probably spent the hours between the meridian and this moment doing the specific mathematics of what he'd done and what it had cost. He looked at Calloway, asleep on the table. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he looked at Grace. He made it, Hayes said. Yes. The fragment? Out. He's stable. She paused. He'll be able to talk to you in a few hours. Hayes nodded. He didn't move from the doorway. She understood that he wasn't sure if he was allowed further in, not physically, but in some more essential way. Mara, she said. He looked at her. She's okay, he said. She's at school. She doesn't know. He swallowed. She texted me this morning that she got an A on the homework she was doing last night. Grace looked at the monitor. Cross lied to you, she said. I know that now. You didn't know it then? No. He said it without using it as an absolution, just as a fact, the record of what had been true at a specific moment. I didn't know it then. She thought about what Calloway had said in the car. He made a rational decision based on the information available to him. She thought about the photograph of Olivia on the couch. She thought about all the decisions she'd made in the last 24 hours based on information that was incomplete and circumstances that kept converting into something different from what she'd understood them to be. He's going to want to see you when he wakes up, she said. I know. I can't tell you how that conversation goes. I know that too. Hayes looked at Calloway for another moment. Something in his face did the thing. The crack, the compression, the reassembling. I've known him for 9 years. I've been in rooms with him that I can't describe and wouldn't. I've kept him alive in ways that were significantly less elegant than what you apparently did last night. He paused. I would like the chance to say what I need to say to him. Whatever he does with it after that is his. Grace nodded. She got up from the stool and crossed to the doorway and stopped beside Hayes and said quietly, For what it's worth, I think he already knows what you're going to say. Hayes looked at her. He said he understood the calculation, she said. That's not the same as forgiveness, but it's a place to start. She went upstairs. The morning came in through the windows of the main floor with the specific quality of Las Vegas morning light, flat and bright and indifferent to what had happened in the night, the city's version of moving on. She stood in the kitchen and found coffee that someone had made, Reese probably, or Santos, one of the men who seemed to manage the logistics of whatever situation they were inside with the same equanimity they managed everything else. And she poured a cup and stood at the window and drank it. Olivia came and stood beside her. They looked out the window at the street. Ordinary morning street. A woman walking a dog. A kid on a bicycle. A delivery truck double parked outside a house 2 doors down while the driver hauled boxes up the front steps. What's your cat's name? Olivia said. Grace looked at her. Ethan said you have a cat. He said you mentioned it in the hospital. Biscuit, Grace said. Olivia made a sound that was the first genuinely light thing she'd heard from anyone in the last 24 hours. Biscuit. My neighbor's been feeding him. I should probably check in. You should probably sleep first. Probably. She drank the coffee. Is your mom gone? She said it carefully, the way you approach something you've inferred rather than been told. 4 years ago, Olivia said. Heart attack, very fast. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. Ethan took it hard. He didn't show it. He's not good at showing that kind of thing. She paused. He showed it anyway. You could tell if you knew where to look. Grace thought about the scar on his jaw and the controlled neutrality and the 3 people in his adult life who he'd said he trusted, and how 2 of them had ended up in categories that couldn't be undone. He mentioned her, Grace said, in the context of Cross. She paused. He said Cross organized the security for the funeral. Olivia's jaw tightened. I know. A silence. I didn't know until last night, when Ethan told me. I didn't know that Damien was there at the church in the cemetery and was already... She stopped, reorganized. Already planning. I'm sorry. I'm angry, Olivia said. It was a correction, not a disagreement. I'm past sorry and I'm at angry. I think that's probably healthier. Grace thought she was probably right. Calloway woke at 9:47 a.m. She was back on the stool when it happened, the cup of coffee replaced by water, the chart updated with the overnight observations in the neat handwriting that she'd kept consistent from the beginning, the same handwriting she'd used in the trauma bay at Mercy General approximately 33 hours ago, when she'd written a man's name on a chart and felt something land in the back of her brain that she hadn't been ready to receive. He woke the way he'd been waking, by degree, the layers of consciousness assembling themselves with the care of a body that had learned to come back slowly. She watched the process. She'd watched it 4 times now and was familiar with it, with the specific geography of his face in the moments between sleep and full presence. His eyes opened. Hayes is here, she said. He looked at her. He came at 7:15. He's upstairs. She paused. I told him you'd talk to him when you woke up, that you'd want to. He held her gaze. Did I tell you that? No, I inferred it. The corner of his mouth. You infer a lot. Occupational habit. She picked up his chart. Your pressure is good. Rhythm is stable. Actually stable, not the managed version we've been working with. The surgery bought you what it was supposed to buy. She looked at him over the chart. You still need 3 days of horizontal. 2. 3. 2.5. She looked at him. You almost died last night. Twice, technically, if you count the hospital and the fragment separately, which I do. She set the chart down. 3 days. He looked at the ceiling. 2 days, and I do whatever you say for the 3rd. She considered this. That's not meaningfully different from 3 days. It feels different. She almost smiled. She wasn't sure when that had started being available as a response to him, but it was, and she didn't argue with it. Fine. 2 days and you do whatever I say for the 3rd. Agreed. She made a note in the chart. He watched her. The question I asked you last night, he said. What you want? She capped the pen. She looked at the pen in her hand. She thought about her apartment, about Biscuit, about her mother who would call on Sunday and would have no frame of reference for any of what Grace would need to figure out how to explain or not explain. She thought about the hospital, about the chart with her neat handwriting and the lot number of the IV bag she'd noted at the bottom, about Dr. Holt's good catch and what it had meant before the next 3 hours converted it into something unrecognizable. I want to know that you're going to be okay, she said. Physically. I want 3 weeks of follow-up before I'm satisfied with the healing trajectory. She paused. I want to call my neighbor and check on my cat. I want to sleep for approximately 10 hours. She looked at him. And then I want to answer your question, because right now I've been awake for 35 hours, and I don't trust any answer I give you to be the real one. He held her gaze for a moment. That's fair, he said. I know. The follow-up, he said. 3 weeks. Minimum. That implies a location. It implies access. She looked at the chart. We can work out the specifics after I've slept. He was quiet. She could feel him deciding something, not about her, or not only about her, but about the architecture of what came next, the shape of a life that had been altered by a night that neither of them had designed and neither of them could reverse. "I need to talk to Logan," he said. "I know. He's ready when you are. And then Reese and I need to handle the Cross situation." She looked at him. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "I'm not thinking anything. You're thinking something. You're always thinking something." He met her eyes. "I'm not going to tell you the specifics, but I'm telling you it will be handled, and what happens afterward will be different from what came before, and the part that's different is at least partly because of you." She didn't know exactly what he meant by that, and she had the instinct that she didn't need to, that there were parts of this world she could be adjacent to without being inside of, as he'd said, and that the line between those positions was one she was going to have to learn by living with it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said back. She stood from the stool. She stretched her back, the long ache of it, the accumulated hours in her spine and her feet, and the place behind her left shoulder where tension had been building since approximately 2 a.m. the previous night. "I'll send Hayes down," she said. She started toward the stairs. "Grace?" She stopped. She turned. He was looking at her with the look she'd come to know. The one that wasn't the assessment or the management, the one that lived underneath all of that, the one that came from whatever part of him hadn't been converted by 20 years of living in a world that rewarded converting things. "Thank you," he said. She stood there for a moment. She thought about the pulse under her fingers at 11:47 p.m., the faint, irregular, stubborn fact of it, the thing that had started all of this. She thought about the specific quality of a decision made in a fraction of a second that turns out to contain everything that follows it. "You're welcome," she said. She went upstairs. The conversation between Calloway and Hayes lasted 40 minutes. She knew this because she was in the kitchen when it started, and she was still in the kitchen when Reese came to tell her it had ended, and she had spent the 40 minutes drinking a second cup of coffee and watching the street through the window and letting herself be tired in the simple, uncomplicated way she hadn't been permitted to be tired since the previous night. Reese sat across from her at the kitchen table. He had the look of a man who had been awake as long as she had and was managing it through the specific mechanism of someone who had done it before. "Cross," she said. "Being handled." He said it the way they all said those things. Not evasion, just precision. The information that was available was that it was being handled, and the rest was not information she'd been given, and he wasn't going to give it. "The Varela contact?" Garza called back at 6 a.m. "He's negotiating." A pause that had something in it she couldn't fully read. Apparently the transfer records were persuasive. Apparently. "The Eastern network stays intact. The Alliance Cross was building is finished." Reese wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Cross loses everything he built outside the syndicate, which means what he built inside it for 7 years also comes under review." He looked at her. "There's going to be a period of reorganization that isn't comfortable." "How long?" "Months, maybe longer." He considered her. "Calloway asked me to tell you that Mercy General has been addressed. Your absence has been explained through official channels. You won't lose your position." She looked at her cup. She hadn't thought about her position in approximately 20 hours, which was either the measure of how much the situation had consumed her, or the measure of how much she had already started to understand that the position, as it existed before 11:47 p.m. 2 nights ago, was no longer exactly the thing she was orienting toward. "Addressed how?" she said. "Family emergency. Someone called in on your behalf. The paperwork is clean." He paused. "Your job is waiting for you if you want it." She sat with the if. Hayes came upstairs at some point. She heard him before she saw him, the footsteps on the stairs, the particular weight of them. He came through the kitchen without stopping, and she didn't stop him, and Reese didn't, and Hayes went out the front door, and through the window she watched him stand on the front step for a moment in the morning light, with his hands in his pockets and his face doing the complicated private thing that it needed to do, and then he walked to a car she hadn't seen arrive and got in and drove away. She watched him go. She thought about what it cost a person to do what he'd done, and what it cost them afterward, and whether the cost and the reason for it were ever in any kind of clean proportion. She thought probably not. She thought probably the point wasn't proportion. Olivia came in from the other room and poured herself coffee and sat at the table, and the three of them, Grace and Reese and Olivia, sat in the kitchen in the morning light and didn't say much because there wasn't much that needed saying right now. And because sometimes the most honest thing you can do after something enormous is just be in the room where it happened and let the room be ordinary for a while. At noon, she went back downstairs. Calloway was awake. He had managed to move himself to a slightly more upright position against the padded back of the surgical table, which she was going to comment on and then decided not to, because the position looked more comfortable than the alternative and the vitals were holding. She checked his dressing, she checked the suture line, she checked the monitor readout and noted the time and updated the chart. And she did all of this with the same focused attention she'd given it since the beginning, because the beginning was how she worked, and she didn't see a reason to change it now. "Ren is upstairs," she said. "He's going to take over the monitoring this afternoon, so you can sleep and I can sleep. He told me he'd work with your protocol." "He said that?" "He used different words, but that's what he meant." She set down the chart. She looked at Calloway, at the man on the table who was alive because of a pulse she'd found and a series of decisions she'd made, and 51 minutes of work in a basement with equipment that wasn't ideal, and a physician who had risen to the occasion of being needed. "Damien Cross," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not asking what happens," she said. "I'm telling you that I know something happens, and that I understand this is the world, and that I'm choosing to be adjacent to it with my eyes open." She paused. "I'm telling you because you were honest with me, and I'm trying to be honest with you." He held her gaze. "That's what you want," he said. "Adjacent." "I don't know yet," she said. "I told you I'd answer when I'd slept." "You haven't slept." "No, but I know that adjacent isn't nothing." She picked up the chart again. "I know that what I did in the last 35 hours is not something I can put back where it was. I know that the world you're in is real and not going to become something else because I find it uncomfortable." She looked at him. "And I know that the man I found a pulse in at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday is not the man I would have described if you'd asked me 2 days ago to describe the kind of person I might—" She stopped. He waited. She looked at the chart. She looked at the fragment in the stainless basin, still under its gauze square, which she would dispose of properly when she had the space to think about properly. She looked at the monitor. She looked at him. "Get some rest," she said. "We'll talk when I've slept." He almost smiled. The real version of it, the one that reached the eyes. She had seen it exactly twice in 35 hours, and she knew it for what it was. Not performance, not management, just the thing itself. "Okay," he said. She turned off the overhead light and left the monitor running and went upstairs, and found the room Olivia had mentioned, and sat on the edge of the couch and took off her shoes and lay down with the specific intentional weight of a body that has been waiting for this permission for a very long time. She was asleep before she'd finished the thought she'd started. Outside, Las Vegas was doing what it did, burning and indifferent and full of people making decisions in the dark that would change the shape of everything that came after. The morning was turning toward afternoon. Somewhere across the city, a cat named Biscuit was being fed by a neighbor who didn't know where his owner was. Somewhere, a set of financial transfer records were making their way through channels that would produce consequences over the following months that she would hear about in pieces, from a distance, in the way that you hear about weather systems that have passed through somewhere you've been. And in a basement below a quiet house on a quiet street, a man with a repaired heart and a steady pulse and 3 days of horizontal ahead of him lay in the particular stillness of someone who has arrived at the far side of something enormous and is taking inventory of what's left. He was alive. She had made him that way. The rest was still being written, in the slow and imprecise and irreversible way that the rest always is. One decision at a time, 1 hour at a time, in the direction of something neither of them had a clean word for yet, but that both of them, separately and together, were beginning to understand the shape of. That was enough for now. That was, for now, everything. 3 days passed the way recovery days do, slowly at first, then all at once. She slept for 11 hours the first time, which was the longest uninterrupted sleep she'd had in what felt like a geological era. When she woke, the light through the window was the amber of late afternoon, and for approximately 4 seconds she didn't know where she was. And then she remembered everything in the specific order it had happened, and she lay still for a moment and let the remembering finish. Then she got up and went downstairs and checked on her patient. Wren had maintained the protocol exactly as she'd written it, which she noted with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose handwriting had always been neat for a reason. The numbers were good, better than good. The trend line she'd been tracking in her head for 3 days had converted itself from a question into a statement, the body's definitive answer to everything it had been asked to survive. Calloway was sitting up. Actually sitting up, not the careful negotiated uprightness of a man managing pain, but the natural posture of someone whose body had remembered what upright felt like and was reclaiming it. He looked at her when she came in. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she confirmed. She picked up the chart. She read it. She set it down. Your color is good. Pressure is stable. The suture line is clean. Wren did good work. She paused. You did good work. Staying still is harder than people think. It was the hardest thing I've done in 30 years, he said, without apparent irony. She sat on the stool. The stool had become her place in this room. She'd moved it twice, and it had returned both times to the same position beside the table, which she decided meant something about habit and proximity and the particular way a person plants themselves next to something they've decided to watch over. The cross situation, she said, handled. He said it the way Reese had said it, with the same precision, not evasion, just the available information. 3 days ago, quietly. He looked at her. The Varela negotiation is ongoing. The Eastern Network is intact. The syndicate is... He paused, looking for the right word. Reorganizing. Reese told me some of it. I know. I asked him to. He held her gaze. I didn't want you to hear it from someone who didn't know what you already understood. She thought about that distinction. It was, she decided, a careful and specific form of respect, the kind that took into account what a person could hold and trusted them to hold it. Hayes, she said. He called yesterday. Calloway looked at his hands. We talked for a long time. A pause. Mara is fine. She went to a birthday party on Saturday. She came home with cake on her shirt and fell asleep on the couch. Grace looked at the monitor. And Hayes? He's working through it. Calloway's voice carried the weight of a man who understood that some things took longer than 3 days and required a patience he was in the process of locating. He's not back, not yet, but the door is open. He looked at her. I told him about the calculation, that I understood it. Was that true? It was the truest thing I could say. He met her eyes. Understanding isn't the same as it being okay, but it's where I could honestly start. She nodded. She wrote the final notation in the chart, the one that marked the end of the acute phase, the transition from crisis management to recovery, the clinical line between what had been an emergency and what was now a life resuming its shape. She wrote it in her neat handwriting with the same pen she'd been using since the hospital, which had somehow survived everything, and she capped it and set it down. I called Mercy General this morning, she said. He was quiet, waiting. I spoke to the charge nurse, and then I spoke to Dr. Holt. She looked at the chart. My position is there. The paperwork held. Whatever was done, it held. I can go back Monday. Will you? She had been sitting with this question for 3 days, in the spaces between monitoring and sleeping and eating the food that appeared in the kitchen at intervals she'd stopped tracking because someone was always managing it. She'd sat with it through the long, quiet hours of the second night when the house was still and the monitor was steady, and she'd had nothing to do but think. I don't know what I'm going back to, she said. That's the honest answer. I know the job is there. I know the apartment is there. I know Biscuit is there. Petra says he's fine. He's been ignoring her with great consistency, which apparently means he's normal. A pause. But I went through those doors as one person, and I'm sitting here as someone slightly different, and I need to figure out what the difference means before I can answer the question accurately. Calloway looked at her. What does the difference feel like? She considered this. Like I know something I didn't know before. About what I can do. She paused. And about what I'm willing to do it for. He was quiet for a moment. I have a proposition, he said. She waited. Not tonight, he said. Not while you're still deciding, but when you've decided, when you know what Monday looks like and what it means. I want you to hear it. He held her gaze with the directness she'd come to associate with him at his most honest, the version of him that existed when the management fell away. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm not asking you to trade one thing for another. I'm asking you to consider whether there's a version of what you're building that has room for what we've become. She looked at him. What have we become? She said. I thought about it seriously, the way he thought about serious things. Something I don't have a clean word for yet, but something real. He paused. You found a pulse that a physician missed. You stayed in a burning building, metaphorically, for 35 hours because you decided the person inside it was worth the cost. That's not nothing. That's not something I can put back where it was either. She looked at her hands in her lap. I need to go home, she said. I need to feed my cat myself. I need to call my mother and not tell her anything real and let her tell me I'm not eating enough. She looked up. I need to stand in my apartment and figure out if it still fits me. Okay, he said, and then I'll call you. Okay. She stood from the stool. She picked up the chart. She looked at the monitor one last time, at the steady line of a heart doing exactly what it was supposed to do, the rhythm that had been absent and then faint and then irregular and now simply present, the way a heartbeat is supposed to be simply present, without drama, without negotiation. She set the chart on the table beside him. The sutures come out in 8 days, she said. Don't let Ren do it if his hands aren't steady. Check them first. He'll argue with you about it. He's wrong. I'll tell him you said so. He knows I said so. She picked up her bag. 3 more days of taking it easy. Not your version of easy. Actual easy. Defined as. No stairs you don't have to take. No confrontations. No decisions that require you to stand in someone's penthouse and hold a room together through willpower. She looked at him. The heroic part is over. Let your body catch up. The corner of his mouth. The real version. Yes, nurse. She looked at him for one more moment, at the face she'd been watching for 3 days and had learned the way you learn something when you're paying the kind of attention that comes from necessity and then stays because it has become its own reason. She looked at it, and she did not say anything further because there was nothing further to say right now that wasn't already understood between them. She went upstairs. Olivia was in the kitchen. She stood up when Grace came in, with the quick movement of someone who had been waiting and was trying not to show it. You're going, Olivia said. For now. Olivia nodded. She had the quality, in this moment, of someone who had spent 3 days adjusting to the knowledge that the world was larger and more dangerous than she'd let herself believe, and who had made the adjustment not by becoming harder, but by becoming more precise about what she valued. She looked at Grace with this precision. Thank you, she said. For him. And for... She stopped. Started again. For being someone he could trust. You don't know how rare that is. Grace thought about the third person. She thought about what it meant to be that and what it asked of her, and whether she was equal to it. She thought she might be. She thought she was going to find out. Take care of him for the next 8 days, Grace said. Make sure he eats. Don't let him convince Ren to clear him early. She paused. And the scrambled eggs. It's cream cheese right at the end, small amount. Olivia blinked. Then she laughed. A real laugh, sudden and brief and entirely human. The laugh of a 23-year-old who had been through something enormous and had arrived on the other side of it still capable of laughing at scrambled eggs. I'll remember, she said. Grace walked out the front door into the afternoon light. Las Vegas in the early afternoon had the quality it always had. Relentless and bright, the city committed to its own glare, the kind of place that didn't apologize for what it was. She stood on the front step for a moment the way Hayes had stood on it, with her hands at her sides and the light on her face, and the accumulated weight of 4 days sitting in her chest, alongside something else she was still learning the dimensions of. She called Petra. She said she was on her way home. Petra said Biscuit had knocked her water glass off the counter that morning, which meant he was fine and also himself, and Grace felt something loosen in her chest that had been held for 4 days. She called a car. She stood on the step and waited for it and watched the street. The ordinary street, the ordinary afternoon, the people doing ordinary things inside their ordinary lives, none of whom knew anything about what had happened 4 days ago, or what it had required or what it had made of the people inside it. The car came. She got in. She gave her address. The apartment, the real one. The one with the student loan statements on the counter, and the cat who knocked things over, and the Sunday calls from Phoenix. And she sat back and watched the city move past the windows and let herself be in transit between one thing and the next, in the particular freedom of a moment that hasn't finished becoming what it's going to be. Her phone was in her hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she opened her contacts and looked at the name she'd added 4 days ago in the parking structure of a building she hoped never to return to, added it with the same automatic tidiness. She added everything, and she looked at it now and thought about propositions and clean words and the space between adjacent and inside, and what a person was willing to become for a reason that was real. She didn't call yet, but she kept the contact where it was. The car moved through the afternoon and the city burned around her in the way it always burned, without apology, without rest. And Grace Mitchell rode through the middle of it toward the life she'd left 4 days ago, carrying everything she'd brought back from the one she hadn't expected to enter, knowing that when she got home and fed the cat and called her mother and stood in her apartment in the quiet of her own ordinary life, she would know what Monday looked like. And after Monday, she would